Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Trenton Bennett, and as a podcaster, I am one half of the team Classic Rock Battles, the Limey and the Yank, where me and the Brit Steve Atkins argue over whose rock and roll is better, which of course we know it's the American stuff. Yeah. We invented rock and roll. I know he disagrees, but it's a fun podcast, but that's not why we're here today. We're here because I'm a voice actor, and as a voice actor, I've done about 30 audiobooks in a wide variety of genres. I've been trained by some of the top professionals, but I've noticed a gap both in authors trying to get a little help getting on to the platform, but also podcasters. We all have one thing in common. We're storytellers. We love telling stories. We love hearing stories. And even if your podcast is an interview style, you're still helping someone else to tell their story. So that's why audiobooks are going to work so well for you. So today I'm going to cover a few basics on the material as far as that, but I'm also available for follow-up. In the meantime, I'm going to start off by saying how you may already be on Audible and Amazon Music. I'm going to talk about how you can brainstorm the fit of your podcast because some kinds are pretty plug and play and others may take a little more work. I'm going to offer you some suggestions on that. We'll talk about how the industry works, and for this one, I'm going to focus more on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes simply because the platform for that is easier to get into and they manage the logistics of your audiobook production. So it's just an easier place to start with, and then you could jump off to working with other companies. And then we're going to talk about how the industry works and how the tech works. I'll go over that at a high level. Not going to dive in, but I will have resources to help you. Okay, so that said, we'll start with the fact that you may already be on Audible. Audible is the website for Amazon for all of their audiobooks, and their Audible player is the only way to access their audiobooks. And in 2020, Audible started adding podcasts into their audiobooks library so audiobooks listeners can find your show. If you go to Audible and search for your podcast, you may find it's already there. And if you find it's not there, I'm going to give you a link you can use to submit and claim your show, which is kind of cool because then you can go, hey, that's mine. And you can use that as another way to make it easier for an audiobook listener to be able to also add your podcast to their show. So the second bit is you may already be on Amazon Music. Amazon Music has been doing the same thing, grabbing podcasts and putting them in, letting people subscribe by voice. Any Alexa-enabled device will let people give it instructions to add a podcast, subscribe, play it back. And just like with Audible, you can go in and say, hey, that's my show, and you can claim it. The difference is Audible doesn't offer this yet, but Amazon Music will give you some basic stats. How many downloads did you have off of Amazon, and how many subscribers? And that also, you can claim that show with a link that I will also include in the links to this slide, because we got a lot of information here. So basically, you could do nothing, and you will already be on Amazon Music or Audible. And the same players, the same apps that listeners use, like Alexa, will be able to let them get to your show without doing anything. The downside is they need to be looking for your show. But you could also take your content and repurpose it as a Kindle book and an audiobook, and you grow your show now into 2 more markets that would directly pay you for your efforts. This will let you cross-promote the show, the book, and the audiobook. And the example I'm giving here is Moxie LaBouche, a PodFest attendee. She has a show called Your Brain on Facts, and she also wrote a book about it. If she chose to narrate that book into an audiobook, that could go into Audible, and suddenly she has 3 different ways to sell the show, and one will sell the other. Oh, wow, I loved Your Brain on Facts, that book, and her voice is so neat. I like the way she read that. I didn't know there was a show with more material. Yeah, I got to go check that out. There's different ways people can leap from one to the other, and it gains interest in 3 different ways now. So as we recap the idea of podcasting through Amazon, just you may do nothing versus you'll have to do something. There's some pros and cons here. And again, don't worry if you don't feel like you have to take all pictures or write it all down. I'm going to give you links. You'll be able to get this as a PDF. I don't mind pictures. I'm just saying, don't panic. I got you covered. So basically, I'm just going to walk through this. It's easier for me to do here than try to read that. So basically, you won't make any money directly from doing nothing, and an audiobook user would have to be deliberately looking for a podcast to find your show. But you're also less likely to run into any technical hurdles, and if you have any copyrighted content, you don't have to worry about that because you're still in the podcasting world. So the pros and cons of doing something are you create an audiobook and an ebook, and you have 3 more ways to market your show and yourself and your brand. But you may have to do some editing to get that audio up to snuff. You may have to organize your content, and that includes the fact that every Audible audiobook does need to be a Kindle ebook before you start. So that will require a little bit of work. And then, if you have copyrighted material in your show, you will need to be sure it is copyright cleared. So I highlight that. Do not use any copyrighted material without making sure you have consent and have properly cleared it. It's very important. If you're not sure, I've got an example here from Amazon Music's terms of service. You'll be in violation of their terms. Books and audiobooks are a different space, and it's policed a little more closely. But at the same time, if you have a podfic, it just depends on the material you're doing. If you're doing something public domain, no problem. All those Tarzan stories that you did a podfic, sure, pop them right in. If it's Harry Potter, maybe not so much. You're going to need to get some copyright clearance first. So now let's talk about how some types of podcasts are kind of ready-made for this. Interviews is a good example. Audible has this series that they'll do of Audible sessions. They'll interview an actor, and the interview becomes an audiobook. They're much shorter, and they're cheaper, but you can buy them. Some of them are free. But the point is, as you can see here, we've got others where you've just collected interviews. So if you have a series of interviews that you want to put into an audiobook, you could simply organize those into an ebook and an audiobook, and your show is pretty much ready-made. Again, I'll talk about the tech because there may be a couple of hurdles you'll need to clear. But I do want to point out a couple of important little details here. I've got a pretty information-rich deck here, and that's why I want to double-check my work, make sure I give you everything. So, for example, be sure and read through your transcripts as you're organizing your ebook, especially if they're auto-generated. Go through the transcripts, make sure they actually look like something that's pleasant to read. Even in the case of an interview style where it's just a straight dump of all of the words that were said, organize it neatly like you're reading an interview in a magazine so that your readers will thank you, because you want them to have a pleasant ebook experience and a pleasant audiobook experience too. The other reason for this is that some of those need to kind of line up the text with the speech. I'll speak more about that later. But here's another brainstorm idea, podfics. I mentioned that earlier. A podfic, if you don't know, is a mashup of fanfics and podcasting. These are people who read fanfics and they record them. We have some podfic people here. Oh, cool. So it's been around for a long time. And so that is something that can plug and play pretty much straight in, depending on the technical hurdles that I'll get to. But I do want to point out here, this middle slide here, this is a website for podfics. Just on this one website, there are over 1,000 podfics for one book by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, Good Omens. There are 1,100 podfics on this search result. So it's a huge market. There's a lot of them out there. And because podfics are really narrating a story, then there's another market for you where you simply formally make it into an audiobook. Whether it's a short story and you do a collection as an audiobook, or you've got every episode of your podfic becoming a chapter in the book, however you want to organize it, it can fit in. Then we have episodic content and lit RPG. Episodic content like Wolf 359, you have these nice, neat episodes that have a story arc. You have recurring characters in an overarching story. It's ready-made for a book, and you could make each episode into a chapter like we were talking about with podfics. And then we also have Ann Kimbrough is a writer who's been at PodFest before. She has a short young adult fiction called Lyric, and she turned that into a podcast by reading the stories and embellishing with sound effects. And the story for Lyric was then easy to make into an audiobook because it is technically structured like one anyway. So then the third example I want to point out here is the Lovecraft Tapes. This is a podcast that is a bunch of people playing roles. They're acting like their characters and speaking in character, but it is a game. So they're doing things like they're playing the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. There is a dungeon master that's like your key narrator. You could take those and make those little episodes, because they are a contiguous story that has a plot and a beginning and an end, and make them into an audiobook just as is. Or there is a style called lit RPG. And if you've ever read a book called a Choose Your Own Adventure book, and you remember those? Yeah, a lot of us do. So Choose Your Own Adventure books were, for those of you who don't know, you're reading a story and then it goes, okay, you come to a cave. Yeah, what do you do now? If you go to the cave, flip to page 72. If you decide to walk around from the cave, flip to page 99. Oh, you've been eaten by a grue. Oh, wait, that's wrong thing. Jump genres there. So you get the idea. You can make that. And Lit RPG has gotten pretty sophisticated. Some of them will have rules for creating a character. They'll have dice rolls, and they'll tell you, roll the dice. Roll a 6-sided dice. If you got a 1 or a 2, turn to page 73. And with an audiobook, if you got a 1 or a 2, flip to chapter 5. And then you hear what happens to you. So Lit RPG is another space that you could leverage with something that's already gamified, like the Lovecraft tapes. So next, we've got true crime, investigative, and real life. True crime and real-life documentaries, they're typically already structured like a book, because the investigation unfolds and then you have the reveals and you get to the conclusions. So that is something that could easily be structured into a book. Then you've got shows that are real-life, like Scott Johnson. What Was That Like? He interviews people with these unique circumstances, and every episode is an interview, similar to interview style, and he can organize those into chapters. And the other thing is, if you have a lot of episodes, you could organize all this around a theme, and you could do volumes. Do an audiobook on one particular theme, then another audiobook on another theme. People struck by lightning, an audiobook, near-death experiences. Maybe those two even overlap, who knows? So that's really kind of neat. And one of the things I'll mention on here, let me get to the next slide first, actually. I'll wrap it up because it applies to all of these. So we also have commentary, self-help, and advice. My first book on meditation would have been a lot easier for me to read if I could have somebody reading the practice parts out loud while my eyes are closed. I would have loved to have had an audiobook to teach me how to meditate. Katie Krimitzos' Meditation for Women is a good example of this. She can have the meditations in individual chapters, and you can replay your favorite meditations. You just go back and replay that chapter. It's already ready-made. Kalinda the Tech has Study Hall with Kalinda the Tech. It is for young women trying to build tech careers, and each little episode she does is a life lesson. Those life lessons could be chapters. So then when it comes to how does my show fit in, I've given you a few templates that are more plug and play, but as I mentioned before, you do need to have a Kindle ebook and make it a pleasant book to read. That's going to be a little bit of editing work maybe, depending. And you can do that by pulling together your show notes, your transcripts, anything that you have from the episodes, whole episodes, commentary, blog posts, anything you have about it. You can use that to gather into organized content. And if you have something that's charts and graphs heavy, you can make a downloadable PDF. Audible users, when they have an audiobook, can also download a PDF. And then you'll slightly modify the text to say something like, see the chart in chapters on page 5 of the downloadable PDF, for an example. So you insert that kind of a guided structure for them. So the best way to get started with this, actually, before we do this, let me take a moment. I did mention I was going to talk about when you're doing content where you're pulling interviews and you're talking to other people, whether it's What Was That Like or any other interview show. Even if your release form for your interviewees allows you to move to other platforms, it's still a good idea to just go ahead and get their okay from it first. But it's even better that you do that, not just because you never know, they may want to be aware, but also because you can reach out to them and say, you know what? I loved your story so much that I want that on my short list of stuff that I'm going to put in my book and my audiobook. Are you okay with that? Most people are going to say yes. But you want them to say yes in a way that you get in writing, or you get a screenshot of them agreeing in a message, just in case you need to come back to it later, because you never know. It's just a good idea to have their permission. But here's where it gets better. It becomes a real win-win when you tell them, oh, and by the way, as I'm working on this, I'm going to promote you. I'm going to tag you in my posts. I'm going to mention that you're featured in my book. When I'm working on your story, I'm going to say, hey, I just finished editing your story. It was, so-and-so story. It was wonderful. I loved your story. Check it out. Check out their website, or tag them in the post. So most people are really going to love that you're talking about them and you're building up excitement around them as you get ready to launch your book or your audiobook. So now I get to the launch thing. Where do I go? ACX is short for Audiobook Creation Exchange. This is the clearinghouse that Amazon, Audible, and iTunes use for all of their ebook to audiobook transitions. ACX is owned by Amazon. You can actually log into acx.com using your Amazon credentials. They're that joined at the hip. And when you do your ebook, which I'll get into in a minute, you want to log in with the same Amazon account that you use to publish the ebook just to make your life easier. But let's talk about that in particular. So Apple has its own iTunes store, and I think as podcasters, we've heard of that. And you probably know Amazon also offers audiobooks through the iTunes store, and they offer ebooks as well. So that, again, while I mentioned all this for Amazon and Audible, the same is true for iTunes. You have 3 different spaces where your show can kind of cross-promote itself. So the rule of thumb, as I mentioned, is you publish your ebook on Amazon, and then when it's done, you log into ACX with your Amazon credentials. And when you log into ACX, you go look up your book in there and you say, this is mine. I have the rights to do the audiobook. They call that asserting your rights, and I'll get to that in a minute. And don't worry, I have plenty of time for questions, I promise. Thank you. So when you go through ACX and you put your production together and it's done, ACX then handles distributing it to Audible and iTunes, and a lot of the logistics is taken care of for you. So that's the path that you would go. And more specifically, as I mentioned, when you go in and you look up your book and you claim the rights to it, you are asserting your rights, and that makes you the rights holder to produce the audiobook. Sometimes we call that RH. So when you read the documentation, you'll see that RH, rights holder, that's you. And to make it easier, when you go to acx.com, since we don't have time to get into that now, go to the How It Works menu, and you'll see all sorts of helpful information for what role you are. I'm a narrator, I'm an author. So you can find out more about how it works just by using that menu. I don't even think you have to log into ACX yet to do that. I think you can just do that right at their site. So now I'm going to get into the tech a little bit, and I want to talk less about these stats on this screen, which again, that'll be in the download. But I want to make sure that you understand a little bit about how your audio will need to pass a certain bar of quality to be able to be published through ACX. The good news is, if you're already a voiceover professional, the bar is a little bit lower. You don't have to worry as much about the quality of the audio. The bad news is, if you're a podcaster, you may find the bar is just a little bit higher. But either way, most voiceover professionals will tell you the bar for audiobooks is not as high as like if you're doing a commercial read or video games. The odd news is, and I'm going to get techie for a moment, the way ACX calculates the root mean square can sometimes mean an odd aberration if you have short files, such as the children's poetry book I did that was some poems under 20 seconds and would cause a root mean square calculation due to there being blank space requirements at the beginning and end of the file. In order to skew those requirements, I would have to change the gain and amplify it slightly. When you upload stuff, though, they have a checker that'll say, hey, it's just not right. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you need to normalize to -3 dB, and maybe also let's amplify that by 0.2 dB. So the instructions you'll get back from the uploader have made this a lot easier than it used to be. The other thing about the tech, though, and this is where I get into the audio quality, is that if you're getting started, this is easier for you. If you've already been recording and you're looking at existing content, it may be a little harder. You need to be recording in a good quality space that's been well treated. In other words, it's treated so the acoustics don't bang off of the walls and the ceiling like they do in here. You're going to need to have a decent microphone, and you're going to need to have configured all of that so your voice comes through really clearly so that it's not drifting off of axis like that. Get that example. If it's not quite set up right, you're going to have to do a little bit of playing with that, and you'll do a little reading and learning if you don't already have that down pat. Since the pandemic, I find most podcasters already know some of the basics of this, and they just have to worry more about the techie stuff on the last slide. But if you're getting started, think about these things, and I'll be giving you links to resources you can use to learn more about how to treat your space or test the sound. That also includes that I'm going to give you the ability to use a free tool to check your audio to see if it will actually work before you go to the trouble of uploading it to ACX. So if that doesn't quite work out, you can also hire a producer to try to clean up your audio. And I'm going to give you tips here because it's not just anybody. Like your podcast producer might not know. You need to be sure you have somebody who is used to producing for ACX specifications. You want to say, hey, have you done audiobooks for ACX before? You know the bar we're trying to clear. Then you want to give them your worst quality recording. Usually about 5 minutes or so would do, but say, okay, this was the cruddiest one that I really want to have in my book. Can you make gold from garbage? Please. And let them work with that. They should be able to provide you a sample of cleaning it up. And once they provide you that sample, double check it. Not because they may or may not know what they're doing, but because sometimes the tech tools can get a little hinky, and you want to be sure to make sure everything they handed you that looked good on their end looks good on your end, so that it's less likely to have a problem with ACX that you have to fix when you're uploading it. So keep in mind, though, that even the best producers can only do so much for you. You may still have the ultimate answer that your content just isn't going to fit. It's not going to make it. Or some pieces of it that you love have to get cut because the quality just won't be there. Don't try to force it. Yes, you can use things like noise reduction, but the degree to which you use them is going to degrade whatever sound is coming through, and you may end up with something that just isn't pleasant to the ears. And just like your podcast, an audiobook is a commitment to listen to something for a long time, and they'll get tired of it real quick if it passed the ACX check. You don't want that. So keep that in mind. And along those lines, I'll tangent for a moment. When you're doing an interview and you really can't control that host, or that guest rather, what you can do is you can give them a checklist ahead of time. It's always a good idea to do a quick tech check before you record. Like before you start doing the final interview, all right, guys, let's talk back and forth for 2 minutes. I'm going to record it. I'm going to play it back and make sure it all sounds good before we really commit to talking. And then I'll hit record again when we're ready to go. Always do that. At the same time, if they can't really, you want to make them have a good space, and they might not have the same equipment you do or the same setup. So a nice hack you can do is say, look, at the very least, when we get on our Zoom call or whatever we're using, a Squadcast, go into your closet and leave the clothes in. The clothes will be a nice dampening thing, and you'll sound great. Just use the closet for a while. And that can dramatically improve your sound, because like I say, a treated space is going to be as important, sometimes more important, than what mic you use. All right, so a quick recap here. We talked about how you may already be on Audible and Amazon Music, and you could do nothing, or you could do something and make a book and an audiobook. If you want to do that, we brainstormed how some of these things are pretty plug and play and can fit in, and then some suggestions, if they don't, of how you can organize all that content. I talked a bit about how the industry works. I focused on Amazon because that's the largest player, and Apple. So we talked about ACX, which is the clearinghouse for both of those. And then I talked a little bit about how the tech works. But the thing to me is I wanted to make sure you all had the opportunity to ask me a million questions. And at the same time, I'm going to leave that there, so you do not have to rush to get your phone out. But if you scan that QR code, that is a PDF of my presentation, and it has everything past this slide is a bunch of links, including my check you can use with Audacity very easily to say, okay, is my audio going to pass ACX? And you can use that to scan your audio. That is everything that I have in content, and I know I've just thrown a whole heck of a lot at you. So any questions? And oh, by the way, I should mention, the fantastic Carrie Cott is going to help you by coming around. Yes?
Once you have your audio, like say you're going to do the audiobook, you make your Kindle, you do your audiobook, can you then take that material and go to another place other than Amazon with it? Do you get it?
Yes, this is a wonderful question on multiple levels. I focused on Amazon and ACX because they'll manage the logistics of an end-to-end project with you, and if you're new, it's going to be easier. You can also, once you get it through Amazon Audible, I don't get into this here, but you can be exclusive or non-exclusive. When you're exclusive, you say, okay, my audiobook's only going to be on Audible and iTunes. I won't sell it anywhere else. I'm going to get a bigger cut and a couple of other benefits. but I lose control to put it somewhere else. If you decide to go non-exclusive, then you can put it anywhere you like. You don't get as big of a cut. But in the meantime, you can always change your mind. You can be exclusive for a bit and go, you know what? Amazon Audible just isn't doing it for me, and say, I want to go non-exclusive. And they'll cut you loose and change the deal, and you'll be able to go to other platforms to sell your book and your audiobook. All right, we got another question here.
Oh, hi. I have 3 pieces of great content that have already been produced in video. I have a documentary film, a show, and a social media project.
Uh-huh.
Do you have experience with turning them into audiobooks? Like, let's just say the documentary film. Mm-hmm. Is there anything like AI that you could put the film into and it could help you with chapters? Or is there anything that could automate or help automate the process instead of doing another 6-month project?
There's a lot of things that AI can do to be an assistive tool. Yeah, you got some insights, Carrie?
No, that's 5 minutes.
Oh, we getting my 5-minute warning.
The
All
insight
right.
is 5 minutes left.
Ask Carrie about AI, we're done. Okay, so it can be an assistive tool. You're going to want to still be the human that makes the decisions and calls the shots. I would recommend looking over all of it, giving yourself a storyboard or something to understand how you want to organize that content. Then pull the transcripts as text and feed the transcripts in and use that language model and train it towards a goal. But then after that, whatever comes back out of that, that is just a tool to get you started. You'll still need to look over it, proofread it, and ask yourself, if I were reading this as a book, would I immediately go flying out to Amazon and give it 5-star reviews or 1-star reviews? Am I going to have a good time? But the beauty of it is, if you're doing a printed book, you can take stills off your video and make pictures, illustrate it. You can make a downloadable PDF that captures key moments of it or behind the scenes, anything you want to give the listener. You're welcome. Next question. And I promise we'll get to you all over here too.
Hi there. I already have my book in Kindle and on Amazon as a paperback. It's called Fertile Imagination for Entrepreneurial Moms.
Cool.
So now my next step is an audiobook, and I've already gotten quotes from like a person that has a studio and knows these rules. But I like your closet idea. So treating a closet like, what else can I do? Like put pillows on the floor. It already has carpet, it has clothes. Like what else can I?
This is a really great hack because this is how I started doing audiobooks. I was in a walk-in closet and then I put carpet on the floor so that it didn't reverberate. And that worked really well for me. You just want to be sure it passes the ACX check, and some of that's going to come to, is my setup right? Does my voice come through clear? And those little adjustments. That is a good way to get started. I hope that helps though. Other questions related to that?
Is ACX that hard? Like, it could save me thousands of dollars if I could figure it out. I'm just afraid if it's worth the effort or not.
ACX is not very difficult to work with. It is a very simple process, and part of the reason I recommend it is because they help manage it end to end for you, which means you don't have to have a paymaster worry about billing, think about tracking your sales and writing checks or any of that. You have multiple ways to price out your book. I won't get into because they're beyond the scope of this. I do have some links in here. I recommend there's a Facebook group on the topic of treating your space that's in there that's called Voiceover, Audio, and Booth Building. I've got it in the links.
Thank you.
There's plenty of info there, and check that out. And okay, so I want to give this side of the room some time. Who had questions? Yes.
So I just published a book last week called Clarity Concepts, The Path for Positive Living.
Congrats.
And it's on Kindle and it's on Amazon in paperback. I didn't realize what a great place this was going to be to promote it. My question is, I think my publisher put it on Amazon. So it's not linked to my account.
Are you the rights holder legally, or did you give your rights to the publisher?
I definitely hold the rights.
Okay, in that case, you can still assert yourself as the rights holder. Be sure you've talked to them so that they know that you intend to do this.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And lady in the back, we have a question back there, Carrie. And by the way, congrats to all of you published authors. What a milestone. Thank you. That is awesome.
I was wondering if you could talk more about the publishing in chapters. So I kind of like the idea of being able to release a 10-minute story at a time and not a full book. So how would that work?
However you want to break the content up is up to you. Anything where your total content, like if you made it short and it's not children's poetry like the one I did, people aren't going to look at that because they're going to think that's a little weird and they won't want 1 hour of content, because a lot of the AI generated junk that started spamming the channel is just short, spat out stuff that people don't like. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. What I am saying is you don't have to worry about your chapters being a certain length. They can vary. I've had some books where one chapter is an hour and a half and the next one's 10 minutes. And then the second is, think of a cohesive beginning and end, or a theme or an arc. The example I'll give is Wolf 359 is like a radio drama. Things happen. There's an overall story for the whole book, but one episode is just a story that goes end to end. Does that help you?
So, and I just want to clarify, so you can publish, like, so I'm thinking that myself, right? Like, so my manager's called, like, podcast is called Manager to Manager, and it's really about, like, the trials and tribulations of being a people leader.
Okay.
The idea of being able to introduce characters that are in various situations across a series of episodes, but not needing to do, like, an entire book at one time.
Yeah, this is a good question. So to recap and be sure I understand correctly, you're looking at the fact that the content will have characters that come and go, recurring characters, whether they're archetypes, avatars, or real people, and they'll come and go, and they may not be in a particular story. It's okay if it's not structured, especially if it's a self-help or an advice like the Kalinda the Tech one that I mentioned. It's okay. People understand that. No one's coming in and saying, I definitely want fiction, and it needs to be beginning to end with characters in an arc. It's okay to organize that where maybe they show up, maybe they don't. It's up to you. As long as it flows the content and the message you want to send, you can really just adapt that to the book space and say, would I have a good time reading this? But you may want to check your continuity. You know, if you have someone that you don't mention, but you should have, you're like, oh, I assumed the reader knew that because I pulled this out of order and I rearranged the sequence. I got to go back and check my continuity. Does that make sense?
It does, and you can publish each one separately, right?
Yes. Just like I mentioned with shows where they've got hundreds of episodes, you might say, I'm going to do a volume with these 20 and another volume with these 20, and maybe they have a theme, maybe they don't. Maybe I just call them volume 1, 2, and 3, but they're all the same theme across multiple books and audiobooks.
Awesome.
Great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are we at time? We are at time. Thank you all very much. I will stick around, and I hope that helps you. Thanks, everybody.